Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us midday here for this webinar. I know we're all doing a lot of those these days, a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of webinars, but I think this is an incredibly important topic, and clearly you guys do too, is because we've had a unbelievable response in terms of the number of people that registered for this event. So again, we appreciate having you guys here. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Todd Knapp. I am the founder and CEO of Envision Technology Advisors. We are an IT consulting firm based out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, been in business for about 22 years. But we do a lot more than just focus on technology. We focus on business, we focus on workflow and the challenges that we all have growing and thriving and surviving in the economy, whatever the state of that. And certainly it's never been more turbulent than it is right this moment. So a little bit of housekeeping real quickly, and then I'll introduce the wonderful panelists that agreed to join me here today. First of all, if you find the conversation interesting and you'd like to learn more, you are certainly welcome to email me. I'm always happy to talk to anybody. But also our Facebook feed is right there. We made a very simple link for you, envisionsuccess.net/Facebook. And then you can certainly follow us on Twitter as well. We do our best to try and talk on a wide range of technology topics on a regular basis and keep the content unique and typically with a different kind of spin on it. So hopefully it's interesting to you. The second and probably the most important piece of housekeeping here is that we do want to hear from you. So Jeremy Gerard, can you unmute yourself and say hi real quick?
Hello, everyone.
So Jeremy Gerard is the mystery voice in the background that every now and again is going to pop in and say, hey, Todd, there's a question from somebody in the audience. Right here in your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a little area where you can type in questions, and Jeremy is sitting there monitoring them to make sure that we answer them. Might take us a second because he needs to wait for a break in the conversation, but we will get to them. So please feel free to ask questions. So I am incredibly fortunate today. I've mentioned that I'm the founder and CEO of Envision. So like a lot of you, I'm trying to navigate everything that has been going on with COVID within my own company. And with me, I have two folks that I rely on very heavily for my own business, Kelly O'Shea from Creative Services and Christine Scarafani from KLR. So I'm going to give them a second to introduce themselves real quick. Kelly, tell us a little about yourself and a little about Creative.
Sure. Yeah. So my name, as Todd said, Kelly O'Shea. I'm in-house counsel for Creative Services. We're a global employment screening and security consulting firm. We've been around over 40 years. I haven't worked there for 40 years, although I have almost 20 in. So I grew up in this business and just, have enjoyed it for many years. And, during this COVID time, have learned a lot. We've experienced some things in our own business, as well as the services we provide to our clients.
I'm running a webinar.
Excited to be here and just have some discussions about it.
Thank you so much. And this is very indicative of the world that we're living in right now. As I'm giving this webinar, my wife just got back from running an errand and came in, and I had to say, hey, wait, I'm running a webinar. So Christine, we're going to talk about that more. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Scarafoni. I am the Chief HR Officer at KLR, which is a sister company to Envision. KLR is a large regional CPA and consulting firm. I've actually worked for the firm for about almost a year and a half. I can say it's been a very interesting year and a half. So I have about 30 years of human resource experience. Most recently, it was in the banking realm for 28 years. So we are really just trying to navigate COVID-19 and the PPP and CARES Act and FCRA, or every acronym you can think of. So we're looking at it, and being from HR, I'm looking at it from a workforce perspective, a workplace perspective. How do we get back to work? Do we follow, the White House? Do we follow, the state, local government? So our day-to-day has been very, very different. And as you can see, we're all working from our homes. So it's quite a different experience for all of us.
Yeah, I spent my morning this morning. Actually, I was attending an all-day conference today that is being done virtually for the first time ever. It's a Microsoft conference that I really like, and so I had that on as a webinar in the background, and then I was spending part of my day today working on Envision's back to work plan and redesigning our office because we run an open floor plan. But again, things we'll get to over the next little bit here. So just to kind of set the stage for the conversation today, the reason I asked to have Christine and Kelly join me is that, you know, Kelly and her company focus on issues of security around employment and certainly the pre-employment side of the world. You know, we were just chatting before this all kicked off, and we were talking about, you know, I was reading stats about there being more than 30 million new unemployed people in the country, you know, up from a 4.4% unemployment rate just on April 3rd to now a little over 23%. And I'm not sure those are even today's numbers. Those are the last few days' numbers. You know, we're in a place where companies had to furlough, they had to lay off employees, and the employees that did remain suddenly went from being largely in the office to being nearly entirely distributed, with the exception of a few niche industries. Companies are going to have to rehire at some point, but some portion of their workforce will continue to be distributed, which is going to have management and cultural problems. There are going to be some advantages to being distributed, and there are going to be some really big challenges to being distributed. So what I was hoping to do today was to pick these nice folks' brains and, you know, talk about from an HR person's point of view, what does this mean for you and for your organization? And Kelly, if we're focusing on how to get through the craziness of rebuilding our workforce, what are the things that we need to be thinking about? So, you know, to kind of start that, I thought we'd begin by talking about how the workforce in general is going to be different on the other side of COVID. And for those of you attending, one of the things I'll do is, as I hear really interesting and salient points come out, I'll just take some notes for you and we can make those available to you after the fact. So high level, guys. Distributed workforce, having a portion of our employees be remote. One, how widespread do you think that's going to be when all this is said and done? Go for it, Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be really widespread. I think we're not. I think in a lot of ways, companies have proven that you can work remote and still be successful. You're not sort of confined to geographic areas for your talent. I mean, you don't have to hire from just New England or you know, just the Southeast. Your talent pool, I think, is a lot wider than what it was before. I don't know, Christine, if you agree with that or.
Absolutely. And, you know, the remote workforce was, I think the numbers were like, you know, 15, 20%. And now the remote workforce is over 60% because we've all had to work from home. So when you're hiring people, we've always looked at the resume and looked at, oh, where do they live? Oh, they live out of state. They, you know, are they planning on relocating? That is completely taken off the table now. We've proven that we can work at home, be productive and successful. So I think it's actually going to open up the whole, you know, US and global for us to hire people.
So I agree that that's a thing. I actually have been saying that I think there's several reasons why distributed workforce is part of the new normal. I think that there is going to be some population of employees that, you know, even when we all say, I mean, you know, you were saying earlier, Christine, that you're working on KLR's back to work plan. That's what I was doing today. You know, the government can say it, we can say it, we could even believe it and say, hey, we're ready, things are safer, we feel confident that the risk is mitigated. Not everybody's going to agree with us. Some people are going to say, that's nice, this is my personal safety, I want to stay remote. Some employees are going to say, I proved that I can do it. I don't understand why being in the office is a mandate in the first place. And culturally, they'd rather be remote. I think we're going to have some employees some managers who start to say things like, wow, you know, we need to rehire a few positions instead of hiring somebody here in New England where like we normally would, where the salary might be X. What if we hired them in a different part of the country where we can get the same skill set for 30% less? There'll be some people that see this as a cost savings opportunity, and there'll be some people who look at it and say, boy, if we had a more distributed workforce at some level, we're kind of naturally hardened against the next event, aren't we? So, to me, it feels like an inevitability. I think you're talking about, 30, 40, in some cases, 50% of the workforce now being permanently distributed. What do you guys think? Is that a high number, low number? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I would say thumbs up. I can see it, from our industry, the CPA world, auditors were always out on the road anyways. So they've been remote, but we like to have them in the office. We like to have them come back in so we can regroup and collaborate. And we've learned that we can do that remotely. We can host the Skype meeting or the Zoom meeting or, just a loop up call to have that same collaboration. So we have sent out surveys to our employee base to say, what are you going to do? What would you like to do? Simple 5 questions. And it was kind of eye-opening for me. There were several people who I know were pretty adamant about, I'm coming in the office. I want to go in the office. Can't I go in even if I'm there by myself? Who have actually said, I'm going to work from home. I'll come in if you need me to come in, but I'm going to continue to work from home, which to me is so great. I'm thrilled about it.
Yeah, I've experienced some of that too. Question for you. So let's talk for a moment, Kelly. Excuse me. Question for you, Kelly. Let's talk about what you think the general attitude of employees that were furloughed will be when they go to be rehired. Isn't it sort of tantamount to saying, hey, you were my most disposable person if this was the first person or in the first batch of people that you furloughed or released? Should we expect these people to be more distrustful of the company or maybe a little jaded coming back?
Depending on the circumstances, generally, yes. However, I think my experience in this particular pandemic was that unlike events of the past, this was really a global issue that we were facing. I think a lot of how that individual feels is the messaging that you build around why is this happening, that you're staying in touch with that individual, constantly communicating with them so they don't feel isolated, they don't feel like they were disposable, but this is just literally a global pandemic that the company is trying to navigate through, and that these are the circumstances. And a lot of small businesses are dealing with this, until they get their small business loans, until they can get some type of funding to keep them going, they don't have an option to do that. So I think how you handle it with the individual employees, and again, I think staying in touch is one of those key factors to make sure that it wasn't something that was transactional, but more this is our plan. Right now, plans can change, but ideally, this is what we'd like to see happen. This is what we expect to bring you back. So I think respect, right, for the individual is important.
I think for us, I wrote a blog on the furlough versus layoff versus RIF because it's very different messaging. And when you say furlough and you explain to them, you're still going to have benefits. You're still employed with us. You're engaging with them and letting them know that we still care about you. And, we're going to get you back to work as fast as we possibly can. Whereby, people that are saying that layoff, everyone knows you could be called back. You might not be called back. And even though a furlough can be similar, it's the terminology. It's how you're making that person feel. They're still attached. They're still getting emails potentially. They're still in the know of what's going on at the company. I think, as you said, it's really important to keep that communication line open, let them know what you're doing, and let them know where the firm's going, the company's going.
So sort of a related topic, and it kind of fits into a different category here when we talk about the pool of candidates. I actually feel like there are probably some companies on the call right now that would say, Yeah, we missed the mark a little on the communication side when we had to make some changes, but we did the best we could. I think everybody did the best they could, but hindsight's 2020. So there may be companies that are worried about how their employees are going to feel. I do also think that this event exposes gaps in the management organizations in a lot of companies. I think we're going to see some senior executive teams that are saying, boy, we have some managers that we thought would be kind of clutch in this situation, and it turns out they're not good at managing a remote workforce. And so I think we're about to see a lot of turnover in other areas of businesses, even where there weren't direct furloughs or layoffs because of the event. So my question to you guys is this: I mean, and Kelly, I'll start with you because you're in the business of security. Clearly, across the 30 plus million unemployed people, there are going to be some folks that aren't so happy about how things were handled. On this call, there might be companies who didn't handle things as well as they might have liked. How do they manage that risk?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be people. You're going to have a bunch of different scenarios. You're going to have some people that weren't happy before this happened anyway, right? So
That's a
this is
good
their
point.
chance to say, you know what, I needed this. I needed this event to happen in order for me to move on and do my next thing, right? Because they're also looking at, the postings as businesses start to reopen. They're seeing these, recs that are open, new opportunities for them. So I think you'll have that. Some people, yeah, I mean, if they don't feel that connection, and they were furloughed or they were laid off or riffed, again, that might be, this is their time to go to their next opportunity. But I think it opens up for the company, trying to refill those positions, opportunities as well for new talent, a little more diverse talent, geographically spread, as we talked about. I think one thing that companies really need to be aware of is there's going to be a lot of competition, right? We have these PPP loans that these small businesses have taken, and they've got to ramp up their payroll in a pretty short period of time. So I think there will be a pretty strong sort of war for talent in this kind of phased opening of the economy. And I think you want to make sure that you're ready with, if we're in the business of employment screening, so your background checks, your drug testing, if you've got regulations, a lot of those regulations, although they've bent a little bit based on the pandemic, once these sort of state of emergencies end, or the states open back up, you're going to be back to business as usual, and regulations aren't going to change in terms of requirements for those. If you don't have regulations, what are your policies around rehires, right? If you've let someone go and it's been 3 months, 4 months, do you have a rehire policy or your new hire policy? And what does that new hire policy look like in a more geographically spread pool of talent, right? If you're focused on doing sort of regional checks, and now you're saying I might hire someone from California, but I'm based in Boston, you want to make sure you're covering that. And Christine alluded to it earlier, not so much national, could even be global, right? I mean, if there are going to be times where we're going to reach beyond our borders for talent as well. So you want to make sure, what do your policies look like today? And what, how are we making sure that you're filling these gaps, and again, this is a time where some companies aren't going to make it through, right? Some small businesses won't make it. And so it would be very easy for me to put together a resume, right? That is just, companies that have gone out of business, and how convenient is that, right? So you just want to make sure, are you doing the types of searches that you need to be doing to make sure you're not falling into that, you thought this person was a, superstar, but you find out maybe that's not the case.
That's an
The other
interesting
thing,
thought. I'm sorry, she just caught my attention with that. I hadn't considered the possibility that employment verification could be harder because there will be an easier excuse. Oh, the company doesn't exist anymore. I never thought about that, but good point. Christine, what
And
were your
there's
thoughts?
so what I was going to say is, Kelly said the war on talent. We have to look at the talent that didn't get laid off, that didn't get furloughed. They might have that survivor guilt. One of their friends got laid off. They're staying at the company thinking, wow, they got let go, they were as good as me, maybe it will be me next time. I'm going to become this, maybe I'm less than passive, maybe I'm starting to be a little proactive. So it's going to open up all of that employment base as well to, us that are using the tools, the LinkedIn, to just reach out and say, hey, we didn't lay anyone off, or you have all the skills that we're looking for. So that's something that we actually have to think about. And from an employer's perspective, try to protect against that. So let our employees that we still have or that we've brought back, let them know how much we value them so that they're not easily pickable by that recruiting firm or that other employer.
I love the way this conversation's going right now because I have sat in on, I don't know, a dozen board meetings with various customers and heard comments along the lines of the job market's going to swing back in the favor of the employee because of the number of people in the market, and it's going to be easier to hire. And, I keep sitting in the room thinking to myself, I'm not sure that's actually true. I think there's probably elements of it that are true, but I don't think it's going to be easier to hire. I think it's actually going to be a lot harder. I do think also that the competition is going to be stiffer in some new ways. Before it was 4.4% unemployment. There just weren't a lot of candidates. All right, fine. But I think when there are a lot of candidates and people are shuffling the deck, I do think that you are having to compete to bring in employees. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes, I remember back many years ago when we had high unemployment. I don't want to date myself, but I remember getting 100 resumes for a job and sifting through and trying to figure out, who's the right candidate? What's the right fit? It was before we used a lot of the, predictive index assessments or DISC or any of that. So it was a lot of work. It was a lot of, did they know somebody? Can that get to the top of the pack because they know somebody within the company? But it was not easy. And yes, there's 30 million people on the unemployment roll, but doesn't always mean that all 30 million of them are going to be qualified for the jobs that we're looking. So different, as you said, than when we're at 4.4 and there just weren't the people. Now, yes, you need to be more selective. We've had 2 that came in today that we just said, we don't want to interview them yet because they're not exactly what we're looking for. And maybe we go in a different direction. But those are things you have to think about. It's going to be a new world when we go back. And yes, people will come off the rolls and it won't be 30 million on unemployment forever. But I think it's going to look different than what it does today, but also different than what it did in February.
So let me ask you, if we agree that it's going to be different, we agree that it is going to be competitive despite the fact that there will be a lot of employees in the market, what do you guys think the differentiators will be for businesses that are trying to hire? Why would an employee want to come to one company over another? Is what they're looking for going to change as a result of this?
So I think 2 things. So yes, and some of this I think is generational too, right? What may be important for a millennial, right, may not be as important for a different generation. But I think also the reverse, which is I'm going to need you, potential employee, to do things that I haven't made people do in the past. Which is if you can't get on a Zoom, a Skype, interview, then we can't even really go to the next step because I need you to know technology. And I know we've had a discussion about this, but I think there's going to be kind of a divide, right? Those people that can adapt a little bit to the technology and those people that can't. And in particular, in a remotely dispersed workforce, that is sort of the threshold, can you log in and have a phone screen or an interview online? That's the kind of starting point.
I saw you smirking, Christine. What do you got?
So when I think about the hiring process, we've always done it based on it's my time. So I fit you in my schedule. if I'm trying to hire global, I need to be available. I also need to think outside of the box of maybe I don't have to physically pick up the phone, but maybe I send them the video link, Spark Hire. They do the interview that way. Send it out. I review the resume, send it out to them. They come back. I can look at it at my time. But as Kelly said, they need to know how to use technology. They need to be able to get that text. They need to be able to do that video chat. They need to be able to access Zoom. But we also have to be able to use those tools. And, I will talk about my profession. HR professionals, many of us have, we've been doing this for years. So this is how we do it. We screen resumes, we pick up the phone, we do a phone screen, we bring them in for an interview with HR, then we bring them back to it for an interview with, a manager, then we bring them back with a, interview with the senior manager. That's going to be very different. We might be bringing people in, doing panel interviews. We might be doing it over Zoom. If we have Microsoft Teams, you might be doing it that way. You might be actually bringing them in and having them do some sort of group assignment, see how they connect with the team that they're going to be working with. I know further down, and I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I know we talk about soft skills, which I call them power skills because they're so different and unexpected. Yes, I can hire an accountant. They know how to do, general ledgers and balance sheets and financial statements, but do they have the soft skills to grow into the leadership roles and collaborate with a virtual team or a live team, whatever it might be? So I think that it's going to start with the hiring process. I think, what we used to do, reviewing a zillion resumes, I think, the applicant tracking systems are going to be built in with knockout questions, or they might have, if you have a higher level applicant tracking system, it may have some AI, artificial intelligence, that's going to look for those keywords to help us do those jobs easier and smoother. This is some of the things that I talk to when I teach at Suffolk University. We talk about the keywords, reading the job description. So our candidates are going to have to look differently, and we're going to have to look at the jobs differently and talk about behaviors and what are we really looking for in that job versus do they know how to do Excel?
So I mean, Kelly, I know you're also as interested in the legal side of this equation as I am. I know HR law is a quagmire that none of us probably want to start. I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm not going to start writing down what the laws are because I'm going to be wrong and I don't want to be wrong. But if you see my little doodle there, I was hearing generational issues and I wrote knowledge gap, and there's a link there. And there's plenty of knowledge gap that isn't related to generational issues. It's not exclusively that, but there certainly is a definite connection. And I read a really fascinating blog post about the theorized rise in age discrimination lawsuits in the years following this event as employers begin to inadvertently even use hiring gates that naturally lend themselves to a younger, more tech-savvy group of people being hired. You think there's a risk for this?
So first I'll say, yes, I am a lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer for the purposes of this presentation. My standard disclaimer applies here. This is for educational purposes only, but I think I agree with Christine in that potentially, but I agree with Christine in that we as employers have to shift, right? We have to make this technology available to these potential applicants. We have to make it easy. Companies like Envision, right? I mean, this is what you guys do. We have to make this process as easy as it can for whether you're tech savvy or not. We can't make it so difficult that we are excluding, a segment of this potential talent pool. So I do think that, yes, we are going to expect that candidates and applicants have to shift, but employers at the same time are going to have to do the same thing.
Hey, Todd, you mind if I jump in with a question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we've got a question that says, any suggestions or options to replicate job shadowing? We used to invite final candidates to job shadow to see if it would be a good fit. We can't really do that virtually for confidential issues, and we can't share internal screens in a Zoom call.
Whew. I don't know who asked that question, but you get a gold star. Yeah, I was actually just having that same conversation with somebody recently, and I'll mention from a technology point of view that there are a couple of options there. Number one, I think what you're talking about uh, brings back another long-standing tradition that I think a lot of companies have lost, which is the mock call. I think that we used to do that a lot, especially in my industry, we used to do that a lot, but I don't see as many companies doing that anymore. I don't encounter it quite as often, and the whole point of job shadowing is to give somebody a sense of what the role they're about to apply for might look like, and then later on make it easier to gauge whether or not they're able to reproduce the culture, the language, the soft skills effectively. I think you can accomplish some of that by using a mock call between two existing employees, where one of them is the customer and one of them is the peer for your candidate, and give them the opportunity to sit in on that without necessarily exposing things that you shouldn't expose. And it's just one tactic, but I suspect that Christina has some thoughts too.
Sure. You can definitely do some sort of a simulation. So there are, interview styles where they actually do a group simulation. So they can't shadow the person, but maybe they can be on a Zoom call and do that role playing. Or you can put together, similar to a Spark Hire video, where they need to respond to set questions on, again, behavioral related. How would you handle this type of situation? So they may not be able to actually see everything, but if you do it with a simulation, it definitely does help. You can also ask them, and this is sort of, I'd say old school, but portfolios. People used to put together what they did. So, if you're a marketing firm and you're looking to bring somebody in, see what they've done in the past, see what they can bring to you and show you. But I'm all for the role play or the simulation. As Todd said, talk about it, do the mock conversation, the mock sales pitch, give them enough time so that they can work on it, so that you're really getting a sense of who they are and what they know. Because if you just do it instant, some people are really good off the cuff, but that's not always a true tell of how they actually might be. So give them the simulation in advance, let them study it, look through it, do some research, make it so that they have to do a little bit of work and then come back and do the simulation or the mock. I think you'll get a sense of, who they are, what they're able to bring to the table, and how they really work when they're not as nervous doing it in 5 seconds flat.
Yeah, and I like giving the business issue, right? Maybe one that you've already solved or a hypothetical one. And, I agree with Christine. You let them go back and spend a little bit of time on it and present back to either the interviewee, the panel. I think that's probably as close that you probably could get in a remote world in advance of bringing that individual on.
I will also say this, that I don't know who asked the question. Maybe you're in a highly regulated environment, where there are legal obligations, compliance standards that would prevent you from being able to use live customers and live data set. But we're not all in that position. I have customers that are heavily regulated. I have customers that are not. And on more than one occasion in the past, because I've been doing video interviewing as my first vehicle for interviewing for years. On more than one occasion, I've reached out to a customer that's not in a deeply compliant environment and said, listen, I'm interviewing a candidate. I'd like them to sit in and listen on this call. Is that okay with you? And I've disclosed that to the customer, given them the choice, and they opted in and said, yeah, we'd love to help you find the next great Envision employee, and we're willing to assist. So if you're not in a regulated industry, consider the possibility that we all want you to have great employees. Those of us that you're servicing, we want you to have great employees. We're willing to help most of the time. So let's jump. I mean, this is a perfect segue. We were talking about what we have to do differently in the hiring process. Let's talk about personality profiling, skills assessment, and BCIs for just a moment. We'll start with BCIs. I had asked Kelly a question at one point that came out of a specific event, and what I had said was, when you have, I had a customer that had to furlough a number of people, and they have BCI obligations. And after they furloughed some people, they were using outsourcers to fill the gap. And the problem was that their BCI process is very long. And so one of the owners of the business called me and just said, hey, what do you think? Do you think I really have to have them go through the whole BCI process, or can they do part of it because they're only going to be in here for a brief period of time? And do I have to wait for everything to be done, or do you think I can get away? And I was like, ask me about your cell phone. I'm glad to help you, but let me point you to an HR person and a VCI company. So Kelly, what do you think? How's that work?
Yeah, so just for folks on the line, just to define BCI, right? Because I think that's a Rhode Island specific kind of technical term, but background checks in general, right? And I've heard people say, well, if someone's going to work remote, then I don't have as much obligation, right? Well, I would argue otherwise, because you're still going to give this person all the keys to your kingdom. They're going to have access to confidential, if not trade secret information. If they're high profile, you're going to put these people on your website. You don't want to find out that they didn't have that degree that was on the resume that you hired them for. You don't want to find out that they have this gap of employment because they used, a pandemic as an opportunity to say, oh yeah, I was with this great company, but they went out of business. We're really looking for, beyond obviously the criminal check from a risk perspective, violent behavior, fraud, those kinds of things, obviously important. Patterns of behavior are important. Yes, check that box for risk, but you want to talk about trustworthiness and reliability. Employment verifications, did they work where they said they worked for the time that they said that they worked there, right? Because you're looking at their resume. And by the way, you want to make sure you're doing your background check based on the resume. Make sure there's no sort of transition in the process that they're telling your background check companies something different than they've put on their resume. But things like, if a company goes out of business, there are tools out there that you can use to, whether it's the IRS or Department of Corporations, there are tools that good background check companies use to be able to kind of get that next level, right? Not that just data in, data out. How do you dig a little bit and find out, did this company ever even exist? Can we get a W-2, or were they a 1099? Let's get that from the IRS and, make sure that we're verifying this type of information. Again, we talked about the school, and quite frankly, for me, I don't care if it's a GED or a PhD. What I want to know is that what you told me on your resume, right, because this is what I'm buying, is what it is. So I would say that, it is more important, because you don't, as Christine said, traditionally we'd bring them in and bring them in again and bring them in again. And you'd have a lot of kind of personal interaction with folks, and kind of, you could see, even when you interview people, when you're live, you see those sort of physiological reactions to certain questions, right? And you can say, oh, I'm going to dig a little deeper. You can still do that on Zoom, but it's a little bit harder. You can't see my leg bouncing, feverishly under the table because I'm so nervous, except that my computer starts shaking. But
I have my fingers crossed. You didn't know.
Yeah. The other thing that we're seeing, we were seeing this pre-COVID anyway, but social media searches, right? I mean, people have a much bigger online presence now than they ever have. And so that is sort of an aspect that I see post-COVID as becoming more and more mainstream in terms of, what is that online persona, right? Because that's as important as what their real life persona is.
So that's all about how we do formalized vetting of what somebody has told us. Christine, what kind of tools have you used to try and get to the intangibles about an employee, the things that they don't tell you, who they are, how they work, how they think. Do you use pre-employment screening tools?
Yes, I do. So I've used several. Currently, I'm using predictive index assessment. So we do the behavioral assessment. And for higher level positions, we do the cognitive assessment. So cognitive is, it's really about decision making. It's 12 questions, 50 questions, 12 minutes. So it's geared towards the C-suite. It's really not geared towards, everyday, managers or under. The behavioral is my favorite because it's based on 4 factors. So it's very easy to understand. It's got science behind it. And the way it actually looks at you from dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. And there's a high and a low side. So it's not a good or a bad side, it's a high or a low side. And what it tells me is, what your normal behaviors are going to be. So past behaviors are great predictors of how you're going to behave in the future. So if we look at my predictive index, in my dominance, well, I'm in HR. I'm situational. I can be dominant and drive the bus when I want, and I can also be very collaborative. On my extroversion, I'm on the very far end. I'm a social butterfly. I know that. I'm very social oriented. But I also can do my job and be task-oriented, but I tend to go to the social side. When it comes to patience, I am on the low side being flexible, and I don't like routine, I like variety. And so when you get to formality, HR, I'm situational. I can be the rule follower, but I can see the gray. So you're able to take a job description, put it through predictive index, and it tells you the pattern of what a really good candidate would be for that fit. So when you're interviewing people and you put them through the PI, you can see if their pattern is close to the pattern of the job. So often we get all like, oh, well, I think they're going to be great because they're just really nice. But do they fit with the job? And so it goes through all of that, and then it tells you, or it helps you if you have any red flags that come up. It will give you questions to ask to dig deeper, and it will also give you pointers on how you would manage that type of a person, whether it's, from a selling perspective, an influencing perspective, or just even how they would be as a manager. So I think it's a great tool, but it's not the only tool you use for hiring.
So I want to just real quickly kind of wrap up this thought around what we do differently in the hiring process by answering a question that I saw come in. And I'm going to ask you guys each to give me a 2-sentence answer on this because I want to move through to the last topic. But somebody asked, with regard to social media, so this goes back to Kelly's question, but the way this was phrased is great for both of you. Kelly was suggesting pre-employment verification, part of that process, looking at social media. The question was, do you recommend that an employer is looking at somebody's social media? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Pros and cons. Christine, from a human resources point of view, do you advocate that companies sort of keep an eye on employees' social media?
Absolutely. I think from a pre-hire viewpoint, and even from the view of our employee, you represent the customer. I mean, you represent the firm. You are the company. And I've often told employees that, and I tell my students that, a company's going to look at your social media profile, whether it's, Facebook or LinkedIn or, Twitter, whatever it might be. And unfortunately, they're going to see how you represent yourself. And it is about, our culture and how you fit into our culture. So I often tell my students, go through and there's something on your social media you wouldn't want your parents, your grandparents to see, please remove it before you start applying for jobs. I do think it's necessary, but you have to be careful legally because people have the right to say what they want to say politically or whatever.
Yeah, To Christine's point, I mean, there are Section 7 rights, right? That that employees have the right, whether they're past employees, current employees, if it has to do with their conditions at work, they have the right to talk about that. So you want to make sure when you're talking about social media, I actually wrote my law review article on social media and hiring and firing. And so one of the things you want to be careful of from an employer perspective is you might see, some protected class information, happy 50th birthday, or, certain types of, if it's religious, or, you want to be really careful if you're the employer on who's looking at this information, right? Is it the same person that's making the decision? You want to just make sure that there's some separation. The reason I like it from a third party perspective is you're removing that from the employer entirely. So there's no decision making there, and it's more of just filters of risk that an employer wants to look at. Again, any results, you want to make sure you understand, Section 7 rights and those types of things before you make decisions. But it is really an incredible and eye-opening tool.
Very interesting. So it is 2:47. My goal is to have everybody off this call 5 minutes before we said we would be done, so that they can all get a break before what I'm sure is their next 3 o'clock Zoom meeting. So in the last few minutes, I thought we would take a little bit and talk about managing culture. All of this is, if I think about the last topic, what do we need to think about doing differently in the hiring process? I heard interesting things there. I heard personality profiles. I heard rethinking how we do our screenings to take into account that we might be hiring nationally or internationally. We talked about thinking about soft skills assessment and creating an interview process that doesn't lean so heavily on technical ability that we open ourselves up to discriminatory accusations, and making the process well-rounded and accessible and easy, all incredibly valuable information. In terms of managing culture, I think all of our jobs as managers, as business owners, especially as HR professionals, are changed dramatically as a result of this. I think the skill set that defines an HR professional is really different now than it was 6 weeks ago. Want to give me your thoughts on that, Christine, in 2 minutes?
Sure. So I agree with you. I think the role of HR has changed. And it continues to evolve. But I really feel that as we have dealt with this uncharted territory, we have had to really become business partners and understand what's going on with the business as well as what's going on with our employees. So we're managing it from so many different fronts. And that's what I started with, is that I'm managing the day-to-day HR, payroll, benefits, all of that with my team. But now I'm also looking at it from, how do I keep them engaged? How do I retain our good employees? How do I ensure their health and their safety as we talk about what the future looks like? Do I need to rewrite our values? Do we need to change how they look? Because now we have this different remote distributed workforce.
So I work for a security company, right? So top of mind for us is really about, we see it on the news now, but just workplace violence, right? There's already reports where anytime you have high stress and high anxiety, in particular at the level that we have it now, we're seeing it. Not even just in the line at the bank, right, which was just last night, but in workplaces, even when remote. This is the time to sort of dust off that workplace violence preparedness policy, and how does that adapt to this post-COVID world with social distancing and remote workers, and really retrofit that so that you're not, when this first instance comes up, you're not trying to figure it out on the fly. I would strongly recommend people just take a look at that, and how does it work in this post-COVID world and what changes need to happen. But again, I mean, and Christine and all the HR people, they're on the front end of this. These are difficult times, and you just want to be as prepared as you can.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And it's actually something me and my HR manager were talking about. Like I said before this meeting, I was working on the floor plan for the renovation to our office to allow for more social distancing space and to think about traffic flow and all that stuff. And we were talking about, standards when we first start to come back, that when are people required to wear masks? When are they not required to wear masks? And one of the things I said to her is, what is our plan when somebody is not adhering to the standard? Because there are going to be people who say, this is ridiculous, it's overkill. And if you believe it's overkill, then you think everybody else around you is ridiculous. If you take it incredibly seriously, you think the people that don't are ridiculous. And so the gap is incredibly wide. And so we were talking about, we need to have a plan and an approach so that in the moment when we're in that situation, we're not trying to figure it out. And so that's been part of our effort. I really think your point, Christine, is really important. HR must be a business partner. My comment to anyone who's in HR is that at this point in time, you are now going to have some portion of your workforce that permanently will be a distributed workforce. You are now in the business of building connections with human beings with whom you cannot be face-to-face, or with whom you will rarely ever be face-to-face. The skill set required is different. The tools required are different. You should have a voice in the conversation and a seat at the table when it comes to the design of the technology in your firms. And I know I'm throwing down with a number of people when I say that, but that's the truth. I've been doing this for 22 years in technology. When I do IT planning for businesses, oftentimes I'm working with a CIO, oftentimes I'm working with a CEO or a CFO. HR is never in that meeting. It doesn't happen very often, but it needs to happen now. And I got to tell you, the last 3 meetings I sat in on last week, where the senior executive team wanted to talk about retrofits to their technology for the future, I said, not without the HR person in the room. And everybody went, why? And I had to explain it to them. But as soon as I did, they went, oh, geez, yeah, right. Well, that's crazy. Why wouldn't we do that? Right? But you need to advocate for yourself is my message to you on the HR side of the house. I appreciate everybody sticking with us. Believe it or not, we've only had one person who jumped off the call, and I'm going to assume that it's because, I don't know, their lawn caught fire and they had to run it. Clearly, it wasn't the content. I guess I think where I would like to sort of wrap this thought up is there is a technology comment I wanted to make, which is that all the topics here are sort of deliberate because I think about these things in terms of progression. How is my workforce going to be different? That's the first thing we talked about. What's my pool of candidates going to look like? Demographically, psychologically, are these all my low performers that were let go first, or was it not like that because it was a global event? We talked about that. What do I have to think about differently in the hiring process now to avail myself of the available candidates? And then the question of, okay, now how do I manage culture and retention? I think that the reality of this situation is that bring your own office is new language that we're all going to need to figure out. Looking at just at the camera here, I know Christine, I know Kelly. Kelly and I, prior this morning, we're trying to figure out how to get a different webcam working on her computer because her home work environment was never designed for what we're trying to do right now, right? But it needs to be in the future. So I believe that one of the things that companies are going to do that will differentiate them and that will help them retain employees is going to be to have a program that supports bring your own office, where we can say to our employees, we have systems. We have tech support planned that's ready and willing to adopt your home infrastructure and help you make good decisions about what you have at home. We have potentially things like bandwidth programs where instead of just issuing you a company cell phone, I'm also going to issue you 200 by 200 symmetrical internet access so that I know you've got the best possible connection. I think what I buy you as a business owner, for technology to do your job may now include some technology that you're going to take home and that I'm planning on you deploying at home. Things that I've not seen employers do before, that I think become part of our new normal after this, if we really want to have distributed workers that work really, really well. So I think we can wrap this up with one last quick question here. Many companies are in long-term leases and are paying large amounts of rent. Everyone working from home might not be the future for everyone in the long term. It's more of a comment than a question, but it's actually, the reason I grabbed it was because I actually just had this conversation with one of my real estate customers, who said to me, I wholesale expect over the next 3 years to do a substantial number of office downsizings, where we're going to see companies that go, you know, we pay X in overhead, in rent and real and furniture and insurance for those things. And now our workforce, a portion of it is distributed. We'd rather spend some of that overhead on supporting them. So we're going to change our workforce levels. But I think it is a really good point to recognize that there are things beyond just what the employees and what we think as HR people, you know, what those needs are going to be that are going to drive whether people are in the office or not. I also think too that we're going to find that the amount of real estate that we need per employee is a little different now, because social distancing is for at least the near term part of our new normal. So if you want to learn more, you want to talk to the folks at Creative Services about screening services and how you can start rethinking your policies, you can reach them at creativeservices.com. If you want some phenomenal advice on tax implications for employees across different states and issues surrounding HR, and recruitment, in fact, you can reach out to the folks at conlitwin.com. And as always, if you guys want to reach out to me, I am always happy to help you think through the technology side of things. On the subject of company culture, our next event is on the 14th. It is focused exclusively on this issue of how do we build culture digitally across a distributed workforce. So we're going to talk a lot about what Envision's done that worked and what we've done that didn't work, and things that we've been seeing literally hundreds of our clients doing that have worked and haven't worked. So that's going to be a great event. Thank you all so much for taking an hour out of your lives and cramming yet one more webinar into an overcrowded day of video. Have a good one. Thanks so much.